Welcome to Autodesk Maya. In this tutorial, we're going to cover polygonal primitives. So a lot of times when you're modeling some object, you start with primitive models, and we're going to go through some of the parameters that you'll find in the channel box through looking at the individual nodes for each model. So in the poly modeling shelf, you can see some of these polygonal primitives, and I can click on one of these, and they would appear here in the center here, as long as I have interactive creation turned off. The other place that you would find this would be under the create menu under polygon primitives, and here they're all listed. Let me click on the tear off bar here at the top so we can have a floating little window here. So if I turn off interactive creation, or turn it back on I should say, when I click on one of these, for example a cube, it'll ask me to basically click and drag the height or the width, the length, and then the height for the object interactively. I prefer to do it without interactive creation, but hey, if you like that and you want to, kind of have fun with these, I mean, sometimes they do have some interesting different parameters, like this sort of helix here. It's basically setting up the coils, and then you click and drag and drag and drag until you get to something. But ultimately, it might not be the same as if you just uncheck that little box and click on Helix. And you can see here I have drastically different results, basically with the form. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these and delete them real quick. And we'll just go through, just drop down each one. So I'll click on Sphere. And you need to have your channel box open to see the parameters of the sphere. And here's the Polysphere input. And basically you have a radius generally for a lot of these, which is basically the size of the object. And then you have the subdivisions of some sort and some other things that might be. But specifically for a sphere, we have 20 on the axis and the height, which basically if I drag to left by middle mousing, you can kind of see I can go down to this very simple form here, or go up crazy high to a super smooth sphere. But again, the default's 20, and you can individually adjust these. So if I want, you can type in a value here. If I want 10, you can see here I'm getting a quite a bit different form here. Or if I put in a value of say 4 here, right, I've got like a, almost like a pyramid kind of structure here. So yeah, or kind of a blade maybe, like a parallel blade almost. So each of these objects, whatever you create, whether it be a cube, each one's going to have an input and some different things. With a cube, you basically have these values, the width, which will basically change the value of like how it's shaped, the height, and then of course the depth. And so you can adjust those values. And then you have these subdivisions on those corresponding width, height, and depth. So again, if I middle click and drag, it's doing evenly divisions along here that I can basically then, create a sort of a model from this much more complex model. So go ahead and delete that object. Let's try some other ones. We got the cylinder. Again, these are the sort of the basic main forms here that we use a lot. Divisions, you can drop it down to say, a lot of times in modeling, I'll go with a value of 8 or a value of 12 for that. Sometimes like an extra cap or a couple caps on the end. You can see here. And then, of course, you can change the height. So if you want something very shallow, right, you could do that on here. And then you can adjust, of course, the radius here. Something really wide, almost like a platform for, a helicopter or something. So primitives are really kind of fun. You can play around with. But each of them have, again, their own parameters in here. You can adjust. Here's the cone. Let's look at one like the Taurus here. Taurus is one of these that basically changes quite a bit in terms of the look of it, based upon these several settings here. So the radius, again, it can be kind of like a big balloon or sort of a long sort of torus shape. And then you have this radius, which is how thick you want that to be. Right, so you can have it like a big, huge, almost like a jumping balloon versus a thin kind of rope almost. There's a twist value here, which basically turns that, twist the values, and then you have the subdivisions, which allow you to basically shrink it down to a very simple shape if you like. You can go as low as a triangle here in terms of the values, or you can increase the values here. So again, very interesting kind of form. Some of the other ones, like there's a platonic solid, which once you start subdividing, kind of becomes like a sphere, but it's basically has these four-sided instead of a polar vertex, which is what the sphere has. So adjust those to your heart's content. You got pipe. Pipe, again, once you click on it, there's more adjustments here. For example, the thickness of the pipe here, which can add some interest. The radius, of course, you can make it really wide, almost like a fence. So this would be an easy way to kind of like generate a fence very quickly, or maybe a structure for a potting plant or something. Yeah, pretty easy to kind of adjust those just with some sliders to start to get something. I do like the Helix. I think that's kind of interesting form. And basically, there's all kinds of different values here. Here's the coil, which basically really changes the structure of this in terms of the shape. As I increase it or decrease it. Then you have the height. So this will kind of squish it or stretch it out quite a bit, almost like a long ladder or a spiraling kind of ladder sort of structure. Then you have your width, how far out it goes. So this would be like more like a lasso shape versus like a slide. I'm thinking like a giant slide going down. Yeah, there's just lots of different values you can kind of play around with. If you want to be more faceted, you can reduce this coil value, and then you can increase it there. And then there's cap values always. So on the end here, it's just a flat face, but if you wanted to add, a pole and some caps, you can see here, now we'd be able to extrude or do something with the end points there. So it's a pretty interesting form. Let's see what else we got. We got a gear. This is kind of a newer one. I haven't looked this one recently, to be honest. Let's check it out. We've got gear spacing. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So it's like the width of these little guys. Gear offset. Huh. So, okay, so it spreads it out much further, right? And then you have the internal radius. So if you want to shrink the gear quality, make it really kind of thin there. So that's kind of intuitive to figure out, what these values are. And then you have, let's see, we have tip. So I'm guessing that's like, yeah, how sharp or how thick you want the tip to be. Then there's, let's see, what other kinds of values? Gear offset, gear middle. What is gear middle? Oh, okay, so it's basically taking this middle division line and kind of breaking it down a little bit. You can also adjust these in the attribute editor. So if you prefer doing that in here, you can also do that in the settings here. So in the initial poly gear 1 here. So here you can adjust how many of these divisions. So I find a lot of times the attribute editor is way more powerful because they have these little sliders here, and it's just easier to kind of mess with, especially if you've never, like I'm not really familiar with this primitive. So if you're not familiar with it, I tell you to go to the attribute editor and really just kind of play around with the sliders here and see what it does. Like this one, the gear spacing is kind of interesting. And then what is the twist value? Oh, that's interesting. So now we can make like a propeller kind of deal. That's kind of cool. I like that value there. Yeah, definitely very interesting. And then a taper. Oh, okay. So there's lots of interesting things you can do to basically create a very cool kind of mechanical looking thing. So yeah, that's one of my favorites now is the gear. Let's see, we got a soccer ball. Whoa, I'm surprised. I've never seen this one before either. So let's see what they got under here for the ply printer. So it looks like radius and just side length. So not much to change in there really. It's kind of like the same parameters for the most part. And then, but cool, we can have a soccer ball. Then we got some other ones here, ultra shape, harmonic, super ellipse. What is them? Harmonics. So these are all kind of sphere-like. They just have, not that one, yeah, this one, and then ultra shape. Yeah, each one of these has like different options in here in terms of like what you can do with this shape. And so again, I recommend you to try them out in the attribute editor. You're going to have more fun kind of playing around with the settings in here and adjusting the parameters and getting, sort of different effects. It looks like most of these are just basically making them a higher subdivision level. I mean, that makes sense why it's called super shape. So yeah. So anyways, that's sort of the basic structure. Again, your polygon primitives, you can find them under the create menu. Go to polygon primitives, and here they all are. And you can click on the tear out bar and try them out. Again, if you have interactive creation turned off, they'll just pop in the center. If you do have interactive creation turned on, however, as you draw it out, you'll basically click and it will appear here in the center. Looks like these don't though. That's interesting. So these super shapes, they don't do that. But the soccer ball, basically you can click and drag to get the size you want, or the pipe. Again, for interactive creation, basically adjust these settings here, by interactively moving. It kind of gives you like a ghost idea of what you're supposed to be doing. But again, you don't always end up with the best results until you go into, the actual settings here and go, oh, let me see about that thickness here, or the radius, or maybe the height I want to increase. And so you can play around with these settings here and see what works for you. The thickness for sure could be adjusted. It doesn't look like, it looks like something happened with that. Let me delete this object again and try that one more time. This time I'm going to turn off interactive creation and just click on pipe here again. So again, you got the radius, right? You got the height, and then here's the thickness. So I guess it's just a very low number here. That's why I wasn't getting much of a change there as I went up. I was like, oh, wait a second, where is this going? And the higher value is basically when you have a bigger radius. So, sometimes you have to think about that, is that, these values correspond to each other, right? So the thickness now is going to vary depending on how big this thing is, in terms of this radius. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on polygonal primitives. And until next time, see you soon. Cheers.